Hi, everybody. This is Carmen with Main Street Yoga. I wanted to have a conversation about something that I see, something that I've been observing over the years, and I'd like to bring it to your attention because I think it's interesting and relevant. And that way, as you start to move around in your space, you can reorganize yourself or even take and eliminate stress out of situations that maybe you weren't really intending to bring stress into. For example, when I first bought the studio, and working at the studio, I was noticing that we had different colored bolsters. Some had patterns, some didn't. Some were brightly colored, some were have a more muted color. And I was noticing that as students walked in, some of them really gravitated towards a certain color, or they put a lot of energy, like that's my bolster. And they knew it was quote unquote theirs because it stood out from the others. And I was watching how if someone who had stepped into the studio just ahead of them that may not have been aware that this person had invested so much energy in one particular bolster, if they happened to pick it up, that student would just make a face. And I thought it was really interesting. And so over time, I eliminated all the variety in the bolsters, and now we just have one color so that there isn't that initial stress being put into an object right when you walk into the studio. You have your mat and things like that. And I found it to be a really interesting observation of psychology because we do really attribute a lot of energy into things and places, specifically, and you might be guilty of this, I know I can be, where you sit in the room. Do you ever notice that certain students really try to get there early and try to get to their spot? And if this is you, I'm not picking on you. I do the same thing. I do it because I'm left-handed. Sometimes if I get into a conference room, I like to sit on one side of the table because I know it's more comfortable to write on, or I have a better view, or I could hear better. I know that there are students that are hearing impaired that like to sit closer to the front because they can hear a little bit better, or students who are working with some visual restrictions. So maybe they like to sit in a certain spot so that there isn't a glare, or that they can see what the teacher is doing a little bit better. Like that's a different element that we're working with there. What I'm talking about is the energy that we place on a spot for no other reason than at one point in time, we sat there in such a repetitive sequence of events that now we have ownership over it, or we feel as though we have ownership over it. And I just think it's really interesting. So on one hand, you could argue that anywhere that you sit in the studio, a practice of yoga should work from a place of contentment. Can you be content wherever you are, even if it's not the place you should be? And isn't the challenge of sitting someplace new an interesting practice to have inside of yourself? Can you be content in a new space? So I offer that as a challenge for you. Can it be us offering a challenge to your practice? What would a new spot in the room give to your practice? How would it change your practice? Maybe you notice something completely new in a new space. The psychology of it says that if you are moving around constantly in the same room, it's harder to retain things. So you actually retain more when you sit in the same spot in the room. So you could argue both ways. I kind of love the back and forth with how, you can play with one and there's always an argument against. I like to play devil's advocate, especially in yoga. I think it's really intriguing to say, well, you could do this, but then it also says this. So just something for you to percolate on. What do you think about your spot in the room? What do you think about moving around spots? What happens if somebody steps on your mat? And how does that show up when we are looking at ownership and our rights to a space that we don't even own? Have a great week.